Hi, I'm Kristen and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and today I'm going to be making a quilt as you go crazy quilt block. I'm using the join and flip method that I have a few other videos about. I'll link to those in the description if you've not seen them before. So I've not always been the biggest fan of the look of crazy quilts. I don't like the randomness of all the colors because I like to color coordinate my scraps, as maybe you can see behind me. If you've never heard of a crazy quilt, it was pretty popular in the Victorian era. Generally, it was lots of irregularly shaped small patches sewn together with decorative stitching, sometimes embellishments, often for memorial or decorative purposes, and they used all kinds of different fabrics and generally stitched them by hand. We're not going to stitch ours by hand today, and I'm going to try and make mine look a little bit more modern, but still with the spirit of a crazy quilt. So anyway, today I'm going to try a color coordinated crazy quilt block, which can be turned into a cushion cover, mug rug, placemat, depends how big you want to make it. I don't do any measuring for this project, but I'll kind of show you the rough size of things. And if you want to take this technique further, because it can be taken further, and learn how to make it into a full quilt without having to use nasty quilt as you go joining strips, which I am not a fan of, just because they're fiddly. Then I'm having a workshop at the beginning of December, which you can join and do live with me. You can ask any questions about the technique in this video and ask about how we can grow it further. And I'll be talking about all of that on the day. But anyway, I'll talk more about the workshop at the end, but let's get started with the materials you'd need if you want to follow along with this tutorial. Okay, so here's what I'm starting with. This pile of different types of materials. Basically, what did I see first? Was it this? I think it was this one. So, you know, crazy quilts have all sorts of different types of materials in them. You often see velvets and sometimes corduroy and silks and all sorts of stuff. So I went through I've got a bucket of like non-quilting fabric. So the first one that drew my eye was this bright green corduroy patch. And then I saw this, which is kind of, I thought, a coordinating color. It's like I think it's an upholstery fabric sample that I got from a charity shop. And then I've got this, I'm not sure where that came from, but it's it's like a thick kind of, you imagine it on a cushion or a curtain, that kind of a fabric, right? Anyways, so that was kind of my starting point. And I was like, okay, I need some things that are going to coordinate with that. So I pulled out a few quilting scraps. This kind of size is fine, the size of my hand. This, again, you know, sort of probably big enough. We'll have a play. This is a bit of like a tartany wool, I think, and some bits of denim in blue and gray. This is like a looser weave, kind of a linen blue. This is another fabric sample. And this is a bit of gray velvet. And I might not use all of this, but this is my pile of things to pull from because I'm not pre-cutting anything. This is a crazy quilt, right? Okay, crazy quilt technique. But it's worth saying, whether you're planning to make a large quilt or a smaller project, have a think about the fabrics you want to include. Obviously, crazy quilts had all sorts of different things. They were often for like memorial purposes. They weren't necessarily always used on beds. So depending on how you want yours to be used, you might need to be more practical with some of the fabric choices than maybe they were back in the day. But I think this is destined to be, I'm not sure yet. I'm going to decide at the end, but it could be a cushion cover. It could be a table topper, could be placemats, that kind of thing. But I'm going to just make it as a quilt as you go block, and then I can decide. And I could also decide at that point to keep going and make it a larger quilt. Other thing I'm using is batting scraps. I've tried to pull ones that are the same. I think these are probably some 80-20 scraps from a while back that I haven't finished up yet. As I said in previous video, I've got a video about alternative batting. I try not to always use store-bought, so I've got some other options such as flannel sheets and things like that in that video. And in that video I said I'm trying to move to bamboo batting, but I still have scraps of other types. So I've decided to try and bundle together most of the 80-20 scraps and use it for this. So I've got ones that are small, like my hand. I've got bigger bits that are, you know, maybe the size of my forearm, and even larger bits that I can cut down. And that's what I need for this particular project. For my backing, because you need some kind of backing fabric for this, I am going to be cutting up pieces from this. This is a fitted sheet. So I use sheets a lot for backing, but I usually use the fitted ones because then you have to cut out the elastic and all that. But anyway, and this one already has a big gaping hole in the middle. I think the children did it. Anyway, so I am going to be cutting pieces of this for my backing. If you don't have something big, you don't need that. You can use other pieces that are similar sizes to the ones you started with. So you could make a totally double-sided crazy quilt thing, or you could pick scraps that you have in similar sizes to what you're using. It will all become clear as we begin to make it. So let's get started so I can clear that bit up. Okay, so here's how I'm starting my crazy quilt block, panel, whatever you want to call it. So I've got a very roughly cut piece of backing fabric. So this is going to be at the back of the project. So this is from that torn sheet. So I've just rough cut it. I've got this scrap of batting that I found. This is just the size it was. And then this piece of corduroy, which is a little smaller than my hand. Can you see that? But crazy quilts don't have a lot of square edges, and this has square edges. So I'm gonna trim this because we do want to make it look a bit wonky and give us places to add the other pieces and make it look kind of funky. But I'm gonna do that after I've quilted this first piece. So you could put a pin or something in here if you want to. I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to sandwich it like that, and then I'm going to quilt it at the machine. I just have, let me just show you, I just have the thread that I had in here before. It's nearly at the end. I'm just going to use it up. Crazy quilts have all sorts of different threads in them, so I'll be changing and maybe using up ends of threads as I go for this. Okay, because I'm going to be using some fancy stitches to top stitch different sections of this, I have got my wide stitch plate on for like zigzag stitch, but I will be using straight stitch. So I am just being lazy and I don't want to switch it back and forth. But if you have issues with like fabric getting pulled into this gap when you straight stitch, then go ahead and switch back and forth. But I'm just not. I just don't have the patience for that, basically. So I'm actually just going to start this first patch with some straight stitch quilting. You can choose whatever you want. Obviously, crazy quilts don't always have quilting inside the patch, but for the purposes of my version, we're going to, and you choose what you want to do. So I'm just going to quilt down here. So I'm not worrying about how even my quilting lines are here. I'm just going at it, basically. So if you're a beginner or you just want to practice different quilting ideas on a small scale, this is a great project for that too. So you can practice making even lines in one little patch instead of trying to do it on a whole quilt, or you can do something totally crazy or even free motion if you can be bothered to switch all of the settings back and forth every time you do a patch. You can do whatever you want. Or you can leave your patch unquilted if you prefer. Certainly it would go faster, but I like the look of having all the different quilting stitches. Okay, so this is my first patch. Let's see, can you see? Yeah. So I've just quilted some, you see better on the back. Some lines are not exactly equidistant, that's fine. So this is my first patch, it's quilted. So now what I wanna do is get some straight edges but that aren't square. Because if I start adding things, which is what I'm going to do, it's going to start looking log cabiny, and that's not very crazy. So we could do that, that's fine, but I've got other videos if you want to just learn how to do it like this. I'll link below. But if you want to make it a bit crazy, that's what we're doing now. So let me turn this. So hopefully you can see that on one of my camera angles. And what I'm going to do is just cut some corners. So I'm going to cut here. I'll leave this. Maybe I'll cut, what do we think, like that? Let's do that. There's no wrong answer. Okay, I'm just trying to make it not a square. Cut it maybe like this. And I'll just cut this off. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 size. That's probably good, right? And I've cut enough so that I do have batting all the way through my sandwich. Okay, so I am not going to get into whether or not you want to have less batting and less batting in the seams and all of that. I go over that in other videos because there's so many different ways you can use this join and flip quilt as you go method. But for me, it's easier to just cut it like this, quilt the whole patch and have the batting inside. So if you want to ask about stuff like that, either look at all the links in the description because it might be covered in other videos, or maybe join me on the workshop and we'll talk about that. But for the purposes of this video, the batting's in the seams. It will be a little bit bulky, but that's fine because we're going to stitch over it all crazy quilt like, right? Okay. So anyway, so this is our first patch. Now we got to choose what we want to add to it. So what have I got? I think I want to save that till I have something a bit longer. So I am just looking for something that is roughly the length of what I've got here. I'm just having a play. I'm kind of planning what I want to do. I feel like I want to add this blue before I do anything else. And I can always trim as well. So I'm going to add, so I don't know if you can see here. So I've got this patch. So I've got this patch and I've got this piece of blue. I don't really need this tail. I'm going to cut this off. Hang on. Okay. So now I need, so all this can go aside for the now. We'll do the other angles later. I need another patch of batting. That will do. And I'm going to press this, and then I need to cut a bit of backing fabric that's, you know, the same size or teensy bit bigger. Let me move this out of the way. Right. It's over here. So this is the rough kind of cutting that I'm doing. Okay, cool. Something like that. Right, I'm gonna go press this. Okay, so this is how the join and flip goes, okay? It's confusing when you first see it, but if you've seen it a few times, which you will have if you've watched my channel previously, then it might make more sense. So what I'm doing is finding a side that's the same size as this. This is the pretty side, and this is the pretty side, so they're going right sides together. Okay, the batting and the backing is already in here. The batting is going to go on the top here, and the backing is going to go right sides together with the backing here. So let me show you again. Right, so here is my little sandwich, and we're quite tiny at the moment, but it's the same for bigger pieces. So we've got backing right side up. We've got already quilted piece, right backing, right side of the backing down. Is where the terms get confusing. We've got next patch right side down and batting just on top of that. Okay, so that's our little sandwich, backing, quilted piece, next piece, batting. Okay, and then so I'm using straight stitch. I'm going to change it though to a regular stitch length, 2.5, and make sure these edges are all lined up and straight. And then I'm using just a kind of a generous 1/4 inch, I guess. If you don't have an inbuilt feeding system like I have on mine, make sure you've got your walking foot on for this, because obviously it's a lot of layers. Okay, and so there I am. I can trim. So I've just trimmed some extra bits in the seam, and if you want to, you could trim the bit of the batting there, but you don't have to. I'll do a little, just because I did a kind of generous 1/4 inch seam there. Okay, so here is what we've done. Can you see? We've done a straight stitch down here. I've trimmed a tiny bit of the batting, but that's optional. And now I'm just going to open it up. So there was the patch quilted before. Here's the one I've just joined. And then the backing opens up and it gets joined. Okay, so here we are. But we need to quilt this and we need to trim it. Right. So the first thing that I'm going to do is put a fun stitch in the seam, and that's going to give us our hopefully crazy quilt kind of a look. And then I will quilt this patch. So I think I'm going to go for, I'll just go for a zigzag, I think, for this first one. Now, of course, you could be changing stitch length, stitch colors as you go or whatever, but anyway, there is the join. I'll show you there. Unfortunately, the video didn't record me actually doing the zigzag stitch, but basically it was just a zigzag right along that seam line, which kind of presses down the seam and adds the crazy quilt look. And then it was time to move on to quilting that second patch. Adding the additional quilting in each patch is totally optional. It's not actually a traditional look in crazy quilts, but I kind of like the added element. I get to test out different stitches on my sewing machine. And if you are one of the people who were a bit confused about how to add additional quilting lines in the regular join and flip quilt as you go method from my previous video, practicing it this way in the crazy quilt might give you an idea of how additional quilting lines can work and when they work. With my second patch quilted. I haven't quilted all the way to here because I think I might want to trim it. So let's go over here and trim. So what we need to do, this is just like crumb quilting if you've ever done that, is find a straight edge and get rid of all this extra. So I'm following this straight line along here to straighten it up, and then I'm going to turn it over. And I'm going to follow this straight line down to here. And I'm not looking at any of the lines on the cutting mat. I'm just making it straight. And then I'm going to cut here. But I'm going to, before I do that, because I think I want to add this one next. So I want to see how long. Right, so I'm going to just put this piece here that I want to add next. And then I'm going to trim so that but I might do it on a slight angle because I don't want to start squaring everything up already, right? So okay, so I'm gonna do this. This is so we can keep the crazy going, right? There we go. I'm gonna leave a pile of my scraps, anything I'm trimming off, that can be used for stuffing. So depending on what this is gonna be for, so if it's a quilt, obviously you don't need to stuff it. But if it's a cushion cover, maybe it could be the stuffing for the cushion cover. Anyways, okay, so here are my patch 1 and 2. They're joined and they're quilted. And now I want to add the next one. So I want to use this tartan fabric. So it's not going to be exactly the right length. I'm going to end up trimming a few more bits, but that's fine. So, but I'm planning on doing it kind of like that. Where's the right side? Maybe that one. So I'm going right sides together with that. And I'm not worrying that I've got little bits here because we're just going to trim and make it wonky later on. And I'm going to find a bit of batting, maybe the end of this one. That's about right. Okay, so I'm going to just trim this. So here is my piece. I'm going to go right sides together. I'm going to put the piece of batting on the top. And then I'm going to slide my backing fabric right side up underneath the whole thing. So there is my wee sandwich. Okay. And then I'm straightening back to a straight stitch. Get off this wavy stitch. So that wouldn't be great. And I'm going to change my foot back to the one it wants me to use. And I'm going to go ahead and join. Okay, and then I open it up, check everything is joined, there's no raw edges poking out. And then if I want to, I can trim some of this in the seam. But I don't need to, but I can. I'm going to right now. Right, okay. Now I'm gonna open it all the way up. So there's the front. I need to open the back. So all the raw edges are enclosed inside. Yes, it gives a slightly bulky seam, but that's just what this technique is. So if we don't like that, we use one of the alternatives. And as I said, those are in some of the other videos you'll find in the description. So I'm actually going to press this one because the wool is making it a bit thick. So hang on. Okay, so there's that pressed a little bit flatter, but I'm also going to play around and find another stitch that I want to use over this seam here. Let's see what would be fun. I think I'm going to try this one. So I'm going to go for that. I'm going to make it a little bit longer and a little bit wider, just because you do you. And I'm going to, hopefully you can see, and then I'm going to go ahead and stitch right down here. Oh, I've got the wrong foot on. Hang on. Wrong foot, wrong foot, wrong foot. Okay, so there's that stitch. Can you see it? So this is a good way to sort of test out stitches maybe you haven't used before. You don't know if you're going to like. You don't have to use them again. If you use it once and it doesn't look the way you like, then don't use it again. So let me take a nice photo. So when I've done this before, I do find myself alternating between the same 2 or 3 stitches that I just like the look of. But obviously you can go super crazy, or you can restrain, or you can even have an order. You want to do it in like straight stitch, then zigzag, then something else. Anyway, I'm going to use the straight stitch again, just because it feels like it's tartan. It needs more straight lines or something. I don't know. So I'm going to speed things up at this point, because as we add each patch, it's really just a repetition of the same sort of thing we did for the patch before. So now I'm just trimming off the edges again of this. I'm going to go with this angle here from the blue patch. Can you see that? To kind of continue making this a tiny bit lengthy. Put that over there. And then I might give this a slight angle here, like that. Okay, so now I've got this piece, can you see? And let me see if you can see here. This seam here you can feel here the bulk, okay? And I've mentioned that in other videos with this technique. So if you don't like that, then go to the more recent join and flip video. It's got like an orange and white block in the thumbnail. And the third option in that video is all about how you can slide the batting in after you've joined and you don't end up with bulky seams. But for this kind of crazy quilt process, I just find it easier to do it this way. It just flows better for me. That's my personal preference. But lots of people would prefer you can join the top and the backing, so you put them in the sandwich in the same way, and leave the batting out and then slide it in before you do this quilting bit. That's an option, but I'm just not doing that. And this is what it looks like on the back. Okay, so now I've got a next bit to add. So I've got to decide which side I want to go to. Maybe this one, maybe this one. Let's see what I can find. Okay, so I'm ready to add this bit now. This is my favorite scrap that I found that kind of tied all the colors together. So I want it relatively near the middle of whatever I'm making. I'm calling it my star piece for this Quilt As You Go project. It needs a little press though, so I'm going to press that first. So that's that pressed. So it's going to go right sides together on here. So I need a piece of batting again. That should work. Let's trim it. Sorry guys, I'm a little croaky today. I didn't know until I tried to start talking on the video that I had a croaky throat today. Anyway, okay, trim this. And this. Again, I'm only being this haphazard with the backing because this is just a torn sheet. This isn't anything I'm precious about. And I do have a policy, if you've not seen my videos before, you wouldn't know this, but I do have a policy of never throwing anything out, even a little thing like this. So this will get saved in, I've got a great big laundry hamper for stuff like this, and it will get saved and used for stuffing for things. So I can cut as ridiculously haphazard as I like because I'm not wasting anything. And often the fabrics are reclaimed to start with, although not always. I do like my quilting fabric. So anyway, I am going to press this backing and then we'll do the next patch. Okay, so I'm going to show you now one of the mistakes you can make because I just made it. So if you don't pull the backing taut or pin it taut or something when you're doing this seam, you can end up doing this. So I'm not sure if you can see, but the batting wasn't pulled tight, so there's a little flip, there's a little fold here. So that's not ideal. So if I was going to be making this into a full great big quilt top, I would either unpick this, pull that, and do it again, or hand stitch this down would be another option at the very end if it's bothering you, or just leave it. It's just a little flippy thing. It's not a big deal. But if you don't want that, if you want it to look more like these, make sure you're pulling the backing taut before you're stitching from the front, because sometimes it's hard to see whether you've done it or not, right? Okay. Now I'm going to quilt this patch. I'm going to go a little faster now because I think you're getting the technique. And I'll just show you as I'm going, and then I'll show you what it looks like at the end. So while we're watching the time lapse of me getting on with making the rest of this crazy quilt block, I wanted to address a couple of questions you might have. So you may have seen the method of making these kind of crazy quilt blocks where you would cut the batting to a set size, possibly also the backing, depending on what you're making it for, and if you're going to be joining them or whatever. And then you would just do a kind of stitch and flip on the top, which definitely is going to be faster. So it depends on what the end use of what you're doing is and the starting point of your materials. So what this method is good for is tiny scraps of batting where you don't have a piece that is the size of the finished either pillow top or block that you want to make. If you want to use up scraps for the backing. So obviously I know I'm using an old sheet, so that might make it a bit confusing, but this is a great method if you just want to use up irregular size scraps in the backing, and then you have a totally reversible crazy quilt, as I kind of said earlier. It's also just a way of having something you can kind of organically add to. So maybe as you get scraps, you don't have to sit here and do this all in a one. You could be just adding a patch with a bit of batting and a bit of backing every now and again, and you just have this quilt or this block, depending on, again, what you want to use it for, that grows over time. So it's just an alternative method. It's by no means the best method. I'm never claiming that. It's just something I'm trying and playing with, and I quite like it. And it uses my favorite quote as you go method as well. So that's probably a bit of a bonus for me. So I hope that makes sense as to why I'm going at it this way. If you have another favorite way of making crazy quilts, I am not trying to say this is better. This is definitely not fast. This is a labor of love, as all crazy quilts are. But it is just kind of fun, and it's a way of playing with your scraps and your fabrics. And I always kind of like the experience where you start with a pile of stuff and you end up with something that you just never knew you were going to end up with at the end. And this is one of those kind of projects. Okay, so I want to pause here and show you where I've got to and just some things to think about depending on what it is you want to do with your piece. So I've just been playing. I don't have a set size I'm aiming at, so it could go more this way, more this way. We could be going lots of ways. What I am ending up with, though, down here, if you can see it, I've got my angle a bit wide so you can see stuff, so I don't know whether this is getting a bit distorted, but anyway, I'm getting a long straight bit here. So I purposely cut some angles off here so I can add some smaller pieces. But I could also decide that the longest, straightest bit is going to be like the edge. So you can either grow like a round and keep adding a piece and be like systematic, and it'll start to look like almost like those blocks where you start in the middle and it gets to look like a flower, if you've seen those. Or you can kind of purposely cut angles in different places so that you kind of have to add in a weird way here and there and just make it a bit more random. And if this could just start feeling long, and then maybe I decide it's a table runner, or maybe I add some things up here. So you've kind of got different ways you can go with it. And in the workshop that I've been talking about, I'm going to talk about what we do when this gets even bigger and you want to add something big on this side, but you don't have enough for the funny angles, and what we're going to do. So if you're interested in making it much, much bigger, that's kind of the discussion that's going to happen there. But if this was just going to become, you know, a table runner, table topper, cushion cover, which is what I'm kind of thinking maybe for this one, I'm just going to keep trying to cut. So here, look, it's a long straight one, so I'll probably have to use a big piece. But here I had some choices about where I cut. This was a rectangle. So rather than having this be a long edge that I'm going to add a big piece to, I purposely cut it in this way so that I can add something small here, and just to give it more of that crazy look with more pieces. It takes longer. This isn't fast. This is fun playtime sewing, not super fast, finish it quick kind of thing. Although it can be quick in the sense that you could be adding, you know, a piece a day when you get a scrap from something else, and it just kind of grows organically on its own. So I had a few pieces that were already quilted from this bit here, and I added some angles, and I'd quilted a bit more than I needed. And so I trimmed them off. So this can be the start of something, and then I've added another piece on here. So these are the start of two smaller versions of this, just with the scraps that were coming off of this one, if you see what I mean. So I might end up with some coasters or some more cushion. You know, it just becomes this, as you have a scrap of something, you can add it a little more organically. That might sound as clear as mud, but anyway, it makes sense to me, and hopefully to some of you too. Anyway, I'm going to keep going, and I'll show you what it ends up like. Okay, let me go over a scenario with you. So when I started the first sections, the first patches, I was quilting a whole thing and then trimming. And that's how I kind of start with the small pieces. But once I get to these longer edges where I need a bigger piece of fabric to sort of cover that edge and join something, you end up with something that's probably bigger than what you need, depending on what your scraps are. Obviously, if you've got a fun, jaggedy corner scrap, maybe that works out perfectly. But if you've got something like this, you have to choose where you're going to trim. So, for example, here is my straight line here of the piece I've already worked on. Here's what I've joined. This isn't quilted yet. So in this instance, I would trim before I quilt, because if I quilt the whole thing, then I'm going to end up with this section here quilted, and I'll end up with like little pieces like this cut off that are quilted. And I could start new pieces with them, like I said, but how many do I need? You know, and I at some point I want to use the fabric, the scraps from this for these other ones, right? So I can either trim here, and then I would have this long edge to join a great big next piece to, or that could be the edge of my piece if I'm trying to make a, you know, a large cushion cover top or something. Or I could angle it this way, and then my angle is here, and then I have another sort of corner of something I can add here. So I would have another bit of interest, and it would be more angular like the rest of this. So I'm probably going to do that. So let me just trim this way, and I can make it as steep or not as I like. So I'm going to go here. Right, so now I have this piece, and I can join that to something else. I'm just gonna, those all fit together, so I'll leave those. And then I've got a choice on the other side. Do I want to go straight this way? So it was quite a big piece of fabric, and actually I'm only using a little bit in the end because I want to keep this kind of fun and crazy looking. Right, so I'm going to do that one. So then I've got these two bits, and I can add them somewhere else. So I will quilt this now, and then I'm going to choose where I might want to use these other pieces. So maybe over here I want some velvet, and look, that's the right size. So I'll put this here, put my batting here, and then turn my backing over and put it there, and then I can attach the next one, and then I've grown it on both sides. So I'm not wasting anything. I'm just making choices to make it look kind of fun and still have that crazy quilt look. So I decided at this point this was going to be a cushion cover. So you'll see me in a minute holding up a ruler to kind of try and see where I do need some square edges to start doing that trimming in order to make it the size I wanted, which was roughly kind of 20 inches by 16, something like that, for the front panel. So this is kind of the process I go through to trim it down. I thought I had video of trimming the actual panel, but I didn't. But anyway, hopefully you can get the idea that that is how you go about it. So you decide on the size and start holding the ruler up as you're going to see where you need to still add pieces and where you can trim things square if you're aiming for a square at the end, or a rectangle. Otherwise, if you're just doing this as a playtime thing, you can just keep growing it and growing it as much as you like. So this is my finished crazy quilt block or panel, since I'm going to use it for a cushion cover. So I cut mine, as I said, to about 20 by 16 inches. This is it on the back. I really like how all the different quilting designs look on the back. And then I made my own kind of envelope style pillow back, if you've ever done those, and my own insert. And that was so that I could use the trimmings that I've been cutting off and saving throughout the process of making this block, plus a whole bunch of other trimmings that were saved from other things in my sewing room, and use that to stuff the cushion. But of course, if you don't mind using joining strips and those kind of quilt as you go methods, you could absolutely cut this block to a square size and add them in rows to each other, and that would be absolutely fine. And I think it would look great on the back with all the different quilting designs. But I decided to go for a cushion. I also made another version of this using some scraps from my Uncle Keith's quilt, if you saw that series on my channel. So I made him a cushion in exactly the same way using his fabrics. So this is it here. So you can see sort of the different looks you can get with this method. So I'm finishing this later in the evening, same day though. So my lighting is a bit funny, but hopefully you can still see the cushion. I'm happy with how it turned out. Just a plain old envelope back. So, oops, some threads. Anyway, it'll look nice on a sofa, maybe a gift. Haven't worked out if I'm going to keep it or give it away. But anyway, yeah, I had fun making it. If you would like to join me and try a quilt as you go crazy quilt panel like this, we'll start with something smaller, see how we go in the time, and talk about how we would expand this into a bigger quilt. So if you want to join me, the link will be in the description. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider it. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Bye.